On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, why to declare bankruptcy. So, welcome back to this week's episode. My name is Shawn Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have on Zoom with me today, both of us remote, your financial coach, George Curbelo. How you doing, George?
Hey Shawn, how are you? I'm surviving my second hurricane here in Florida, so I think we've managed to now be a Floridian and go, this is just wind. We're okay.
It's just a Cat 3.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, no, I'm glad. So as we're recording this right now, we did weather the storm. Was Hurricane Idalia, something like
Idalia.
that?
Mm-hmm.
Idalia. So we weathered the storm. It was so far off the coast that really all we
Right.
got was a bunch of wind and rain. The problem with these kinds of storms is even though they're way off to the west of Tampa Bay is itself a peninsula. So not only does the rain come and fill up all the ponds and lakes and all
Right.
that stuff, but then the winds, they come from the south moving north. And so they push the water from Tampa Bay up into Tampa. So the real danger that we have is flooding.
Yeah, surges. Yeah, that's exactly it. I agree with you
Right.
there.
So, but no, my home was fine. We kept power all night. No damage, no flooding that I can see in my immediate neighborhood. I probably need to head into the office at some point today, and so then we'll see what kind of flooding we're dealing with between here and
The
my office.
roads. Yeah, it's always
Yeah,
the roads and stuff that, the drainage is not as good. You would think it would be, but it's like, where do you put what, four inches of water at once and stuff like that? So it's
right.
doesn't sound like a lot of water, but when it rains like that, it is a lot. So it's
Yeah,
interesting.
no, and I was watching the news this morning, and they were showing some of the bridges to and from, you know, from St. Pete to Tampa or from Clearwater to Tampa, and some of those bridges are closed down because they are totally flooded.
Yeah. Oof.
So, so
Yeah, I
we got
would
to wait.
say I'm glad I stocked up on toilet paper and water, because that's usually, isn't that the emergency go-to when it comes to any of these?
I thought that was a COVID thing.
Well,
Stocking
toilet
up.
paper, dude. It seems like we're always stocking up on toilet paper for some reason. I guess we can't handle our stress levels when things happen. So it's like, okay.
So meanwhile, we thought we'd knock out an episode today remote. So we're both
Yes.
remote, both working from home, but we thought we'd knock out an episode. And actually, George, I'm gonna let you
Yeah.
take it and run with it because it was number one, it was your idea.
Well,
Number
I
two, it
appreciate
talks
that.
about bankruptcy, so I thought it was a great idea. So
So think of it like this: always having discussions with folks in regards to their situation, and had a client talk about, hey, I'm in this position where I need to think about bankruptcy as an option. And, you've had the conversations with a lawyer trying to understand exactly like where we are. And when I'm talking to the client, it really comes back to this emotional, this is the last resort kind of thing. Sometimes it can be looked at as a first resort because it's like, hey, I'll just, again, if you're a little flippant, right, you could be like, well, I could just have the, not pay the bill, the debt goes away. And again, that's the misconception, right? The debt goes away and then I just pay one payment and I'm good to go, kind of thing, depending on the chapter. And again, I've
right.
previous episodes of the Crushing Debt podcast will, explain your chapter 7s and chapter 13s. But so from a client standpoint, again, I'll be the client, right? In this situation itself, I make, what's good money, right? So this is, again, we're all perception here. But if I make $70,000 to $80,000 a year and bringing home, but I have too much debt, and I can pay the debts, but I can't pay rent, or I can pay rent, but I can't pay all the debts. What is the feeling you get? As a client itself, I probably am over, that feeling of stress, feeling of overwhelm. And I'm like, is bankruptcy the option? And the question I would ask too is like, what other options do I exhaust before I go to Mr. Yesner and go, hey, I need to discuss bankruptcy as an option at this point. And I think that's where some of the people itself kind of find themselves when it comes to, what do I do next?
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I do see bankruptcy kind of as an option of last resort. Now, at the same time, I'll talk to somebody that says, I don't want to declare bankruptcy, and we'll talk about all the other options. And let's not even try the other options because
Right.
we know for this, that, the other reason, they're just not going to work. So even though bankruptcy might be the first thing that I jump to when talking to a client, it's because I've already gone through in my head
The other
all of the
things.
other possible options, and none of them are potential options. And so I think the first thing that I would analyze, a lot of times people say to me, how much debt do I need to file bankruptcy?
Right.
Well, typical attorney answer, it depends.
It depends.
So, somebody that makes 70, 80 a year versus somebody that brings home 70, 80 a year. Because 70 to 80 a year means you're probably bringing home 50 to 60 or
Correct.
40 to 50. Where you bring home 70, 80 a year, you're making, 100 grand a year.
100. Right.
It also depends on the number of people that live in the house and what other income. So one of the biggest misconceptions about bankruptcy is, so let's say I decide to file because I have too much debt.
Yeah.
Well, my wife lives with me. And so bankruptcy is based on household income. So she doesn't have to file, but the bankruptcy trustee is going to want to know how much money she makes because bankruptcy is based on household income. And the
Household income.
concept, yeah, the concept there is, if I pay the mortgage and my wife pays the groceries, and one day my wife comes home and says, I didn't make enough to afford groceries this month, I'm not going to let the house starve. I'm going to go out and buy groceries.
Right.
Or if I say, honey, I don't have enough to pay the electric bill, she'll pay the electric bill. So it's based on household income. So we got to look at household size. And so, we've got 2 kids. And so the threshold for a family of 4 is going to be larger to file bankruptcy than the threshold for a single person that lives alone, or a husband and wife, or even a
Right.
family of 3. The threshold for a family of 6 is going to be greater than the threshold for a family of 4. So you've got to look at all of those different things. And so the first question would be, well, I get it. You make 70, 80 a year. Do you have a spouse? Do you have a roommate? Do you have a significant other? I mean, this issue came up once with a same-sex couple that I represented, where at the time we're not, marriage was not legal between same-sex couples.
Right.
And so I got challenged by the United States trustee that said, wait a minute, we get that the partner that makes zero money make zero money, but the other partner makes 6 figures. They have enough to pay their bills every month. It's household income. So that is the first step of the analysis that we have to go through is, and like you said, if we say, maybe combined you do have a significant amount of income, that may be an option, or that may create an option where bankruptcy isn't the best issue. Maybe we do try to settle out the debt, talk to the creditor individually. um, you know, maybe it doesn't work if you've got, for example, 10 creditors and then you've got them coming at you from 10 different places. And so maybe debt settlement isn't the best option and bankruptcy is, because it consolidates all of that into one. But so those are all the different factors that we need to look at.
Right. So I'll come in and I'm like, okay, I'm single going through this situation, and have it's 70, but you're right, or 80, and it's my take home is 56. If I got to take taxes, got to do all the things that are necessary from that perspective.
Right.
So that will obviously have an impact then if I'm married with kids, that kind of situation from that. Okay, so that makes
Right.
sense. I look at then the options where it's like, okay, as a coach, we got to figure out, hey, do you have a budget? Do you have a plan? How are you managing your money? How did we get ourselves into this situation? And a lot of times we get like, I don't know where the money's going, right? I don't know, or I have a tendency to shop too much, or I have a tendency to do, I have bad habits. And again, maybe just habits, and it's say no bad. We're not going to be judgy here.
We're not
We have
going to judge.
habits that put us in a situation that could, that increase that possibility for spending, right? So we look at, maybe I took out a loan, right, and to try to consolidate that didn't work. It got us into that situation. Still used credit cards, and used some of those buy now, pay laters. Oof, those get people into trouble where it's like, hey, a t-shirt for only $5 a month kind of thing. And you just, you get like fast credit approval. So what got us into this situation is one thing, but do we get into the point where do we stop paying for the debts, and then, because you got to still save up. I'm assuming there's a fee for bankruptcy, right? There's going to be some type of fee. Again, I understand the it depends kind of situation, how much,
Right.
but how do I save for that if I'm already struggling to
Yeah.
make ends meet? What's your,
So
what's your wise advice from that perspective?
so a couple of different things there. A couple different issues kind of to unpack there. First of
That's
all,
what I do. Come on now.
that's you throw the questions at me, although this is pretty much what a typical bankruptcy consultation looks like for me. So
Hey, I'm getting it for free. I appreciate it, man.
there you go. Although let's be clear, George is not the one that needs to file bankruptcy in this.
I've got
In this,
problems, but I'm not there yet. We got that's
so
going to be a special show if we have to go. We have to go that route. So
bankruptcy will interfere with your ability to buy this new house, by the way.
I
Um,
would imagine.
so so the first thing is there's two different types of budgets we look at or talk about within a bankruptcy. The first is called the means test. The means test is basically what I was talking about. How much do you, what's your gross, what's your take home, the size of the house impacts what is allowed, what is not allowed. So your earlier analysis, I think the median income for a one person household in Florida is around 60 grand. So somebody who makes 70 grand is going to be above the median income, which means at first glance, they're going to be ineligible for a Chapter 7.
Yeah, makes
So
sense.
what we need to do then is we need to take away those expenses that the IRS says are reasonable and necessary. So the IRS has a number for what somebody should pay for utilities, what somebody should pay for car maintenance, what somebody should pay for groceries, for rent, for mortgage, for so when we take all of that away, we come up with some number. That number represents what the IRS believes is your disposable income. If that number is, and I'm gonna generalize it, but if that number is about $100 to $150 or less, so in other words, the IRS is saying you have between $100 and $150 per month of disposable income. Now you're back to a Chapter 7. Even though you're above the median income, we can still file it as a Chapter 7 case. However, if the means test comes back and says you've got 500, 600, 700, whatever, uh, disposable income at the end of the month, now we have to file a Chapter 13 plan, a
Right.
repayment plan, and the creditors are going to be paid based on whatever your disposable income is per month. So if I had $400 disposable income per month, it's a 60-month or 5-year bankruptcy plan. That's $24,000. If I owe $48,000 in debt, they're getting paid 50% of what I owe. 48,000, they're getting paid 24,000, $400 a month. We're paying our creditors back 50%. If I owe
Gotcha.
$240,000, we're paying back our creditors at 10%.
Gotcha.
So it's just how much disposable income. So that's the first budgetary
So
analysis.
so let me ask you this. If I so some of the fears too is like I would want to, if we're going to start over, right? And we're going to try to build your emergency fund, have a budget, have more money at the end of the month, right? Then more money
Right,
or more month than they at the money. I'm going to try to see. I
right.
already messed it up. Couldn't even get there.
That's okay. I messed it up last week.
If we, but if we get into that situation where like, hey, am I going to if I make more money because I want to start building that emergency fund, is that going to change the monthly payment? Is that going to change the situation that we would have in regards to what's being paid back as part of the settlement?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot as well. So the second budgetary analysis, and I did a podcast episode on it, it's Schedules I and J of the bankruptcy petition. Schedule I is your income, Schedule J is your expenses. If you're in a Chapter 7 scenario, That is more like a snapshot in time. So whatever my expenses are, whatever the snapshot of my
Got it.
finances look like today, that's largely going to control. A chapter 13 is more of a fluid thing. It's more of a living, breathing thing. So yeah, if my income goes up year to year, the bankruptcy trustee is going to want more money because now my disposable income has gone up. By the same token, if my income goes down, we can always ask the trustee to downward adjust because my income went down. Or, I assume if some, not assume, I know if some other issue comes up. I've had clients that have said, well, I'm on a 5-year plan, but this unexpected thing happened where now I can't work anymore. And we can ask the court to maybe discharge the case early, even though we haven't made all of our payments. So
Right.
it is a kind of a fluid thing. Now, it's not necessarily a dollar for dollar increase. So if I get, and let's make the math easy, if I get a $12,000 raise from last year to this year, the trustee's not going to say, great, you need to pay an extra $1,000 a month because you got a
Right.
$12,000 raise. But your payments may go up a little bit to account for that
For the
additional
increase.
money. And it's an annual review. You got to submit your
Oh,
tax
it's an
returns to the
annual review.
trustee.
Got it. So
Yeah,
if I were to work, like, again, I have the opportunity to work overtime. It's not an instantaneous change that would happen from that perspective. It would be part of the annual review. I come back and go, well, I worked a ton of overtime so that I can either save money or maybe, and again, whatever the thought process would be, making sure that we can make ends meet and build kind of that emergency fund. How would that impact?
Yeah, so two things. First, real quick, yes, there is a part of the Schedule I and J budget. There is a part of your monthly budget that the trustee allows you to set aside for what they call entertainment. So,
Okay.
you need to go to the movies. You need to go out to dinner every once in a while. You need to go to a theme park every once in a while. The bankruptcy courts aren't going to be so strict to say you can't take a vacation while you're in bankruptcy. Now,
Right.
can you fly first class and stay for 2 weeks at an all inclusive resort
Yeah.
in Hawaii? Probably not. But to say, hey, we're going to take a 3-day weekend and go to Universal or go to Disney or go to this park or go here, go there. I have a client that owned jet skis, and the judge specifically said, I'm not going to stop you from taking the jet skis on the lake to blow off some steam every once in a
Yeah.
while. So there is some quote fudge room in the budget because we have to live. We can't just
Yeah.
work 24/7. So there is some room there in the budget. The other thing is that you're it's it's going to be something that we review on an annual basis, but it's going to be due at the time tax returns are due. So when you
Right.
file your tax returns every year. The other thing that I would say is, so one day I remember when the law firm first became kind of successful and I was able to take my first big check from the
Yeah.
law firm. I called my dad, who's my CPA, and I've told this story on the podcast before, years and years ago. I called my dad, he's a CPA, and I said, Dad, the law firm did great. I was able to bring home the very first time I was able to bring home like a 5-figure check from the law firm. And my dad was like, That's great. And I said, But I'm worried, Dad. And he said, Why? And I said, Because I'm going to have to pay taxes on that money.
Right.
You could almost feel his hand reach through the phone and grab me by the neck, like Homer chokes Bart Simpson. His point was the fact that you're making more money. Yeah, you're going to have to pay taxes, but you're making more money to pay those taxes.
Exactly.
So I've had clients say to me, well, I'll just stop working overtime and that way my chapter 13 payments won't go up.
Right.
Well, number one week of overtime, 1 month of overtime, some overtime here, some overtime there, isn't going to totally skew your numbers where the trustee is going to say, we want another $1,000 a month.
Right.
And at the same time, make as much money as you possibly can. Make as much as you can and let me worry as the bankruptcy attorney. Let me worry about how we're going to argue this to the trustee in terms of what it should do to your payments when we file your tax returns at the end of the year.
Right.
Make as much money as you possibly can.
Yeah, and that's to see as a client. So as me as the client who's in this situation, I shouldn't have to worry about like, okay, I'm not going to do as much overtime or I'm not going to make as much money because I need to worry about how it's going to affect this, the actual, I guess I'll call it settlement, whatever it is that you're paying on a monthly
Right.
basis. But at the same time, for me as a client, I would hope I'll work with, again, a great coach like myself. And
Right.
we'll say, hey, let's put, we have the budget that's been set, that's been scheduled through the chapter 13. Some extra money that we have, let's start building the right habits. Pay yourself first, put some money aside, save some money that we need to do, and start to build that foundation so that once the bankruptcy is completed, and again, what you say, 5 years, depending on the length of
It's
time.
if you're over the median income, it must be 5 years. It cannot be any more, and in some cases, it cannot be less.
Gotcha. So I think that's so great. See that? So I'm always learning with Shawn. There you go. So for that, that's where I would say it's going to be such a long haul. Why wait 5 years to then start building the right habits to avoid getting us into the same situation that got us into this situation the first time? And I
Yeah.
think that's where, for me, those are the things that I would need to kind of work through as part of that. Now, again, love the fact that we went through this exercise, but the other options, like you're going to vet me, right? And just be like, hey, did
Right.
you do this, and what is this, and this that I should be kind of looking at as part of, my investigation?
Yeah. And so a lot of times it also depends on why you're coming to me to file bankruptcy. So
True.
if it's a mortgage
I'm nervous.
foreclosure,
What are you talking about,
well,
Shawn? I don't know what am I going to do? I can't, I can't pay
well,
rent, or I can't, I got this emotional
so
charge.
the I get it. It's emotional. It's a last resort. It's
Yep.
the what is it? The Scarlet A, the Scarlet B,
Right.
bankruptcy. I get all that, but we've got to look at, people don't file bankruptcy because they want to file bankruptcy.
Yep.
People file bankruptcy because a spouse died and their income dropped, because they lost their job, because they got sick, because they mismanaged their bills, their expenses, because they got into an accident. So what are the symptoms behind the bankruptcy?
Yeah.
If the issue is a foreclosure issue, well, then have we looked at a loan modification? Have we looked at a forbearance plan? If the issue is a loss of job, have we looked at getting a second job? Have we called the banks and the creditors and the credit cards to say, hey, I lost my job, I need some help? If it is an IRS issue, have we worked with the IRS? A lot of
Right.
people say, well, if it's an IRS issue or a student loan issue, those debts are not dischargeable in a bankruptcy case. And that's true. But maybe what we can do is we can discharge the other stuff, discharge the credit
Right.
cards, discharge the hospital bills, discharge, the personal loans. And that frees up the budget
To
now
be able
to
to pay
pay
those.
those bills that
Yeah.
aren't dischargeable, pay the
Makes
taxes,
sense.
to pay the student loans, that kind of stuff. So we got to look at the symptoms behind, but your basic options are going to be talking to the creditor, see if there's something that can be worked out with the creditor, maybe doing a consolidation loan. If you've got some extra money saved up, maybe doing a settlement of the debt.
Right.
I would not necessarily ever recommend, there's been one or two times, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend invading exempt accounts. So,
Mm,
should I take a loan against my house to pay my credit cards?
right.
Well, no, because if you don't pay back the house loan, they can foreclose.
To take your
You know,
house. Right.
right. At least here in Florida, they can't take your house if
Okay.
you for a credit card debt. They can if you put a second mortgage on it. Visa can't take your house away from you. So taking out,
Oh, I see what you mean.
money,
Yeah. 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 Gotcha.
yeah, taking out money from your IRA, your 401k. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that because the creditors can't take that away from you. Now, maybe there's an extreme circumstance. I had a client once that we were talking about bankruptcy, and I said, how much are you in debt? And he said 100 grand. And so we're going through what different bank accounts and what different money markets and what different things. He had $900,000 in a day trading account.
Wow.
Now, day trading account is not a retirement account. It is
Right.
not protected. So I'm like, dude, you got 900 grand in a day trading account. You've done well enough to bring it up to 900 grand. Take 100 grand from the day trading account, pay off your debt. It shouldn't take you too long to build it back up to
Build it.
900
If you already
grand.
did at that point, yeah.
Right. that was not the answer he wanted to hear. But
Ugh,
the problem is, had we filed bankruptcy, the trustee would have said, great. They would have taken the day trading
they would have
account,
taken it anyway.
they would have used it to pay the debt, and then we would have been done. So, bankruptcy was a bad choice in that scenario. So I think you've got to look at what are the causes, what are the symptoms. If it is basically somebody who is just, you know, not as good at managing their money, that's what the budgets are for. That's what you're for.
Right.
I've used that Schedule I and J budget to send to clients to say, look, I know we're not going to file bankruptcy, but take a look at this budget and see if this will help you get a handle on your expenses.
Yeah, and
Um,
I agree with you. I think that's kind of the first from a client standpoint. I think that's where we look at as bankruptcy is, the what if, yeah, I just need to, and we'll take care of it, and we'll just have one payment. But I agree. I think it's, like what got us into this situation is our inability to manage a plan, our execute on a budget, execute on a plan itself. The emotional tie that we have to buy now, pay laters or credit, being able to spend money that we just don't have, and that kind of, so those are symptoms that I believe, even if, let's assume we go through the bankruptcy, they're still there. And that just means, 5 years from now, or whenever the time, the discharge date is, it'll be, you're still in the same situation where you're going to run into the same, you might run up the same debt all over again, and then you're still in the same situation, probably making more money, and then realizing
right.
I can spend more, even though the behaviors and the habits itself haven't been really addressed. And I've seen that over and over when it comes to like debt consolidation. So again, a lot of these are tools. They're
Right.
tools in the tool shed that you can use to be able to manage yourself in crisis mode. But if you don't manage what got you into this situation, you can be going through this over and over again for the rest of your life if you're not
Yeah,
managing this set.
I don't normally have any repeat clients in bankruptcy, but
I
I
would hope
do
so.
have them. I do have them from time. I've been doing this long enough that I have had a
Right.
few that have come back, 8, 9, 10, 12 years later. And again, sometimes I don't want to beat anybody up,
No.
for it. Sometimes stuff just happens.
Yeah, I agree.
I lost my spouse, I lost my job, I had this medical issue. Sometimes
Yeah,
stuff
life
happens,
happens. Yep.
and I get it. But yeah, being able to budget, being able to look at what got you here. What is that book? What got you here won't get you there. Although sometimes what got you here will get you here
We'll
again.
get you get you here at least.
So right. So yeah,
Well, what if
that's
I told
that's
you as a client as well? I'm like, hey, but what about my credit score? Like, I have to worry about my credit? Like, this is going to really damage that. What's your response to that kind of response there?
so the issue there, the irony there
Yeah,
is, if you're in a place where you're defaulting on credit card debt, defaulting on a mortgage debt, your bankruptcy's already, or your credit score is already beat up.
it's already taken a hit.
Bankruptcy is not going to do any worse. Now, what I understand is the larger the score, the bigger the fall. So
Yeah,
somebody that starts with a 750 that files a bankruptcy may end up at 600, whatever. Somebody with a 650 might end up at a 580, for example. And, there is
right,
no set formula for if you file bankruptcy, your credit score will drop by X. So the first thing that I typically talk to them about is, your credit's already getting beat up. Bankruptcy isn't going to do much worse.
right.
Number two, your score will recover. When we were born, we had credit scores of 0. So your score will recover. Now it's typically, I think it's 7 years after a chapter 7 and 10 years after a chapter 13 is when it should fall off your credit.
Right.
But again, I've had chapter 7 clients that have gotten credit card offers weeks after their discharge.
Oh my goodness.
So it all depends on the type of credit. I mean, yeah, if
Right.
you file bankruptcy, you may not be able to buy a house for 2 or 3 years with a
Correct.
conventional mortgage, but maybe you can buy a car, almost immediately. Maybe you'll get credit card offers almost immediately, because I did write a blog on the website about the time frames. So most people know it's 8 years from one chapter 7 to the next. But then, and I don't recall off the top of my head, I want to say it's um like 2 years from a chapter 7, from a chapter 6 years from a chapter 7 to a chapter 13, 4 years from a 13 to a 13, and 2 years from a 13 to a 7, or something like the correct. If those are incorrect, I did research on it. The correct time frames are on my blog.
Right.
But yeah, there are time periods where if you file bankruptcy, you can't file for another however many years,
So there's
depending on
still
the
a gotcha. So
yeah, depending on what you filed and what you want to file again. But yeah, it will impact credit. There's no way to get somebody out of debt without impacting their credit unless we pay off the creditors in full. All of these options, unless you pay the creditor off in full. So if I say we're going to settle with the creditor, that'll impact your credit. If
correct.
I say, we're going to pay them a lump sum, but it's not going to be every penny that's owed, that'll impact your
That
credit.
still impacts. Yep.
We're going to pay it, but we're going to pay it in installments until some lesser balance is paid. That's going to impact your credit. There's no way to get you out of debt unless everybody's paid off or without
Yeah.
a negative
Pay
impact on
pay off.
credit.
Right. If you're using one of the options, they all will have an impact on the credit score in one way or the other than paying them
Right.
on time.
But credit will recover. It
But
might take some time.
it's not the end all be all kind of thing. It's like
The
it's
thing
not the
that
worst thing that could
the
happen.
thing that and it also, I think it kind of depends. So somebody in their 80s, what do they need credit for?
Right. Exactly.
What are they buying on credit from 80 to 90 years old?
Right.
And maybe they have to, who knows? But then the flip side of that coin, someone in their 20s, by the time they really get to the point that they need credit, when they're into their 30s, 40s,
30s,
50s,
40s. Yeah.
bankruptcy will be way in the rearview mirror. So at any age level, you can make an argument that credit shouldn't be the determining factor in whether someone wants to file bankruptcy.
Fair enough. And I think it's definitely something we look at as again, I'll do a Google search and it's like, what's bad about bankruptcy? This is your top 10 reasons why you should or should not, or here's the reason, here's how to make money while you're in bank. I mean, just again, it's all out there, buddy. It's all out there.
Right.
So, but I think as a client, as a consumer itself, I'm like, okay, knowing what my options are, where I'm at, who do I need to talk to in this time of need as well, and what adjustments do I need to make as I prepare to make this decision? So what would be your advice, Shawn, to me as a client, right, to say, what are the things that I should be doing in before I make this big decision, because it's a big decision to be able to move forward. What are some of the things that I need to be thinking about before I go, yes, let me do this?
Well, and again, I think I go back to the very beginning. How much debt do I need to have to file bankruptcy? More than you can reasonably, or more than you can afford to repay over a reasonable period of time.
Yep.
So if you're just spinning the hamster wheel, you're just churning on the hamster wheel, maybe bankruptcy is a better option. If you've got, 10 different creditors, yeah, we could settle with them, but then it'll be $50 to that one and $75 to
Yep.
this one and $25 to this one and $100 to this one and $30 to this one. And maybe you don't want to do that. If it's an emergency situation, I'm about to lose my house. I need to file bankruptcy to save the house. Those kinds of things, I think, is all that should factor in. And then again, do your due diligence. How long has your bankruptcy attorney been practicing bankruptcy? Are they making any suggestions other than bankruptcy? I mean, I will sit down with a client, say, here's all your options. Now, I think bankruptcy is the best option because, and I've told clients, I think bankruptcy is a terrible option and we
Right.
shouldn't do it at all. Um, how many attorneys have you interviewed? I'm not afraid of competing. Talk to me, talk to a couple other of my peers in the area. I think by and large, a lot of the bankruptcy attorneys here in Tampa are good bankruptcy attorneys. So talk to me, talk to other bankruptcy attorneys, figure out who you like best and go for it.
Gotcha.
Um, get the information, talk to you, George, about,
Yep.
is this something that I can get out of with just changing my behaviors, changing
Right.
my habits, sticking to a budget. Um, you know, I I don't know, and I know one of the things we talked about pre-recording. We can talk about how attorneys' fees work and how I'm supposed to pay for an attorney. I don't know that, at least for me, price doesn't necessarily factor into it,
Right.
um, because when all is said and done, we pretty much all charge the same price.
Right.
So I don't know that price necessarily factors into it, but I know for some people it does. And so if that's a qualifying factor, then that's a qualifying factor.
Well, I think if you're in that crisis mode as well, it's like, oh my goodness, I need to. You're right. We just realized bankruptcy is not free, right? There's no put in legal paperwork and that's it. It's done. There's probably thousands of dollar fee that's associated with this particular work. And if I'm in crisis mode, I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I do to save for it? So again, it's kind of like, am I working overtime to save for that particular, am I not paying a particular credit card at this point in order to save for it? The quicker you save for the fee, the faster you can at least start with the proceedings. Because let's assume it takes you 6 months and you're not paying off a credit card. Now you're being threatened maybe by, suing from the credit card brands and things like that as well.
Yeah. So what I typically tell clients, I will never tell a client to not pay a debt that is current. So if you're current on all your credit card payments and you want to remain
Keep
current
going.
on all your credit card payments, go for it. One of the things that bothers me about the debt consolidation, debt negotiation industry
Yeah.
is they will tell people to fall behind.
Stop buying
Now,
it.
I get it. It's true. Visa has no incentive to settle with you if you're current. So I get it. But I just don't know that I would feel comfortable ethically telling a client to fall behind. Now, if the client says, I'm definitely filing bankruptcy, I'm filing it next month, even a hurricane hitting Tampa Bay isn't going to stop me from filing bankruptcy.
Right.
Well, then, yeah, there's no reason to pay your credit card bills. Use that money that you would normally make on minimum payments and pay me.
Gotcha.
I'll take monthly installments, but I can't file until the fee is paid in full. I can't discharge your fee to
Right. And you
me
still
by
have debt with
filing
you.
your right.
Right.
But
That makes
but
sense.
I'll take installments. I think most attorneys will as well. Now, in terms of the fees themselves, so I know you're at least looking at a $313 fee to file a Chapter 13 court cost,
Court
filing
costs.
cost.
Correct.
For Chapter 7, that's 338, at least as we record this. I don't know. It probably will go up over time.
Of
I don't know
course.
when it's scheduled to go up again. But right now, the cost is 313 for a 13 and 338 for a 7. The other issue is every bankruptcy attorney has to file as part of the bankruptcy petition what it is that we charge the client. And the court has to approve of that. So if we overcharge, the court or the bankruptcy trustee or the United States trustee is going to ask us to justify our fee. So for that reason, attorneys typically are not going to overcharge. And if they are, it's because there's a more complicated issue.
Yeah.
And so the attorney will then track their time so they can justify that fee to the court. The other issue is with a Chapter 13, I was part of a panel. It's got to be 10 to 15 years ago now. So I was part of a panel. There were other debtor attorneys, there were creditor attorneys, the trustees were there. We had a big hearing in front of the judges. And we basically said, look, here's what it costs us in time to do a Chapter 13 case. And the judges basically ruled and said, fine, if it costs you that amount or less, you don't have to prove up your fees. You still have to report your fees to the court, but you don't have to prove them up. So what you'll find is that most Chapter 13 attorneys in Tampa charge that amount. Over the course of time, that amount's gone up for cost of living and cost of inflation and cost of living increases and all that. Right now, that fee is $5,000. So
Okay.
if you want to file a Chapter 13 in Tampa, be prepared to pay $5,000. Now, where the attorneys differ is what they take up front. So
Gotcha.
if the attorney says it's $1,000 up front, well, then part of your bankruptcy plan is paying the remaining $4,000.
4,000 for that makes sense.
If a trustee says if an attorney says it's 4,000 up front, then you're paying 1,000 within the Chapter 13 case. As you make your payments to the trustee pays your attorney whatever the balance is on your
If it
on your
makes
fee.
sense. Okay.
If it goes above 5,000, I got to justify it to the bankruptcy judge.
Makes sense.
Now the way that I personally do it is most times I try to split it 50-50. So 25 up front, 2,500 in the plan. That's typically the way that I do it. Now I've made exceptions from time to time, charged less when I felt it was necessary, got more up front if I thought it was more complicated. So I'm not binding myself to those fees within this podcast.
It
But
depends.
it depends. But that's the way that I do it. And that's
Of
probably what you're
course.
going to find is
And
that's
that's
how
good.
most
Yeah.
attorneys do it.
Obviously every lawyer is going to be different. Every state's going to be different. So again, it just depends on where you're doing your bankruptcy and who you're dealing with from that. But I think
Right.
what we're trying to really feel for in this situation is really understand, again, as a client, what do I do? What should I be expecting as part of this process? And how do I manage? What do I need to do to be able to make such a tough decision? Because it's going to be a difficult decision one way or another. So it's really more making sure that you have enough knowledge to be able to make an informed decision for your situation. I think that's
it is a tough choice, and I get
yeah.
that, and I like to walk everybody through the analysis. So if you decide that you are going to file, at least you understand why I suggested that as the best idea, or why I
Absolutely.
suggested it as not a good idea.
Not a good idea. Yeah. That's good. I
Yeah,
like it. So again, as a client, I feel better that I had this conversation with Shawn. And again, these are your typical kind of questions that
yeah,
seem to come out when we're talking, even when we're talking to clients as well. It's like, what if? How about this? What if? And again, my answer is always like, you got to talk to Shawn if you truly, from a coaching perspective. My job is to make sure we got a plan, we understand what we're doing with the money that we are making, and seeing all the options itself before we go down that road. I
yeah,
just want to make sure that the clients itself are informed. They know what their situation is. They understand their debts, and again, which ones can be discharged, which ones are not. But again, I'll leave the professional advice to the professionals. For me, it's more
yeah.
of like, I think it's time to have that conversation with
I've answered these questions once or twice before.
yeah, you get the idea. Exactly.
So,
You get the
and that's
idea.
actually how I know that I've done a good consultation. If the client leaves my office and says, "Thank you, I feel better.
Yeah.
Thank you, I feel like I can sleep at night. I feel like a weight's been lifted off my shoulders." Those are the things I'm looking for to know that, whether they hire me or not, at least I know I've given them good information and I've done a good consultation.
And I think that's the emotional lift that you're hoping for in any of these conversations. It's more of like, I have a plan. I am better. I have more knowledge about the
Right.
situation itself, and now I can move forward, in control. And I think a
Right.
lot of folks who are not, when we're talking about stress, it's always about the unknown. And a lot of times it's just more of like, I don't know what I need to do. What is next? And I think, having these types of conversations allow you to get a better feeling for it.
Exactly.
Love it.
So
Well, there you
cool.
go. Thank you.
So have we reached the end of this week's episode?
I think we have. I think we've survived the hurricanes, and I've survived the grilling of the. I'm a little sweaty. I'm sweating here because it's like, man, I'm talking to the bankruptcy lawyer. It's like I can't do this, but it's good knowledge and good information. I appreciate the support on this there.
And we start college football season on
I
Thursday. Actually, we started it last week.
Well, last week there were a few
So
games. Yep.
so this is not the first time that a hurricane will be a pain in my side. So hopefully
Mr. Florida State here. I got it. I got it. I
with
got
all
it.
my
Well,
paraphernalia in the background here.
yeah, I was just wondering, like who you rooting for. Just trying to figure that out. But I think
Anyone who's
we've
listened more
listened to
than
this podcast. We know
anyone
who
who
you root.
listened more than two
Yeah,
weeks knows who I root for. So
fun times.
meanwhile, I guess that'll do it for this week's
Yep.
episode. You already did the line once. You want to do it again?
We are here to make sure that everyone has more money at the end of the month than more month at the end of the money. Woohoo!
Nice. And we'll talk to you in next week's episode of the podcast.